Hey Nerdpreneurs, in today's reflection episode, we dissect our interview with Jonas the Zombie Magician from Germany. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, what the heck are you doing? It's a freaking zombie magician. How do you not want to know more? Anyway, I'd go back and check it out before listening to this. It's interview number 5. I'll link it in the show notes. Now here's Frank and I talking nerdy about the magically undead.
Talking nerdy. We just talking nerdy. With all this talking nerdy. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the mere statement of zombie magician piques curiosity. So It was one of those moments where it's like, of course, I want to know how the heck that came to be a thing that's in reality. And so the story itself is entertaining. And I thought it was really interesting to hear, you know, his version of like where magic became passion for him and where scaring people became passion for him. But as far as like the lessons I got out of this, the main thing I thought was just that you really do got to follow your passion. You know, this didn't feel as much like a, how to make money episode or, how to be rich doing things in your passion. It was much more about like, here's how you actually be happy with what you're doing and follow your passion. So because the values that I thought he brought to this were less about monetary stuff, but more about like, I love my friggin' life. I do all these things I really, really love doing. And that's how I measure success.
I still really am tickled by the idea that his persona has a death day instead of a birthday. It solidifies that immersive quality that you want in a performance like this.
I was tickled by his accent. I don't know. I felt like I was captivated by it all the way through most of his stories. He is a radio guy too. He kind of has that radio personality when he's talking that I thought brought a lot to just making it more of an entertaining type interview as opposed to a interview where we're really like digging around for clues as to how you get to be successful. Not to say there wasn't anything of big value, but I found that this was just a really fun one. I thought we had a lot more fun on this one versus other ones.
Yeah. I mean, I will say it was also an interesting opportunity for us to work or talk about something that is very visual. I mean, magic is a highly visual medium, and at least in this case,
much like being a zombie.
Yeah.
And scaring people,
Yeah.
I guess what I also liked about this episode was I learned more about you a little bit because you are someone who enjoys scaring some people, which was interesting for me to learn that you had actually had a similar job to that. And I wanted to ask you specifically, like, what's actually fun about scaring people for you? Because there was talk of it being a really fun and awesome thing to do.
Yeah, well, I feel like, Chris, if you had done it, you also would have enjoyed it. And it doesn't take a certain personality. It's not like someone who enjoys inflicting those kind of experiences on someone per se, because you, like we talked about in the episode, that someone is there and they've signed up, they've paid for the experience. They know what they're getting themselves into, or they've been dragged by their friends and family to go and have an outrageous time. You just have to use your judgment as a good human being, whether you're taking something too far or whether you are choosing the right mark. Now, that doesn't answer your question of what about it is.
No, you've avoided the question quite delightfully. I'm just saying, like, I agree with you in the fact that, okay, yeah, they've opted in for this, but some people opt in to get whipped by other people for the sexual gratification. It may not be my thing, but it sounds like the scaring thing is kind of in your thing. So I think people are opting in for it, yes. But why do you enjoy it?
Given that example that you just gave about people choosing to be whipped, I would say that there is similarities there. That the people who do the whipping enjoy it because of the effects that they get out of people. And very much as an actor, performer of any kind, I'm sure would agree that they enjoy the reactions that they get from their audience and the immersion. Because if someone is so terrified, that just shows, wow, they are so immersed. They are so buying and hook, line, and sinker into the performance you are doing that A, you're doing a good job, and B, like they are transported. Because that for me is what I love is whenever I was on stage or on screen, if people watched and they were like, wow, like, or that you could see them on the edge of their seat, you knew you were doing a good job. And that feeling of doing a good job is great, but also that feeling of giving people something unique that you are presenting is also very special.
Is there any part of you or so that
You're really
is
trying to
like,
get, do I enjoy making
no,
people suffer?
really, well, here's the thing. It's like you're not supposed to scare people, right? You're not supposed to hit
In real
people with
life.
whips. You're not supposed to,
In real life.
trick people or lie to them. But when someone lets you do it, is there any of that, like, I don't want to say guilty pleasure, but it is kind of that, like, I'm doing something I'm not supposed to do and I'm allowed to do it so I can really enjoy it. Is there any of that?
You know what, Chris? It's been a long time, but I'll indulge you. It's been a long time since I've done that kind of scare performing, but I will say that there was a satisfaction on a very, very small level. Because for me, it was, I actually really, if I saw someone was terrified and scared and their friends were terrified and scared and trying to push me away or whatever, I mean, that would be bad. I would feel terrible. But whenever I would scare someone to the point of crying, their friends would be laughing. And I would be like, this is okay. This is safe. Like, I know that it's safe, and they will realize soon enough that it is safe as soon as their friends like help them up and I've walked away. But if they seriously thought they were going to die, I would not enjoy it.
I don't know. I'm just curious about it because, well, to me, I was on the magician side of things. I kind of like, there was a part of me that really liked getting one over on people and being like, I tricked you. And so there is a satisfaction, at least on my side. I didn't pursue magic for a decade or more like Jonas did, but I did my share of like magic when I was a kid. I had a number of card tricks, and it still feels good to trick people.
Before we go into the magic side of things, haven't you ever scared a sibling or a partner or a family member or a friend? Just around a corner, just boom.
Yeah, I've definitely done that. And
what's the feeling?
Oh, it felt so good. But I admit that that's there for me. I just want you to admit that that's there for you, that you enjoy it more than you say you do. Because not that I want to lie to people, but there is a part of me that, man, if I got an opportunity to like lie to people and get away with it in a context where like they wanted me to do it, my conscience isn't going to get back at me. That's what magic is. It's like this conscious free lying. And it's weirdly satisfying. So I'm curious. I think that's probably the same for scaring people.
I feel like that's a lot like acting too. I mean, when you can put on something so convincingly that other people are so entertained, I mean, it is a weird desire. And, the fact that people like us enjoy that, I don't know if the entire world is that way. I mean, I'd love to ask a sociologist or a psychologist, what they think about that.
Hey, Nerdpreneurs. Speaking of psychologists, did you know that William James, the father of American psychology, once said, everybody should do at least 2 things each day that he hates to do, just for practice. James believed that by pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones and doing things that challenges us, we can build resilience and develop new skills. Now, I'm about to ask you to take a page out of William James's book and do 2 things that might be a bit uncomfortable. Number 1, tell a friend about this podcast. Word of mouth is the only way we grow, so share it on your socials or tell a friend that you heard this cool interview with a zombie magician. The second thing is go leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts, like Captain Henley. He left a 5-star review. I'm going to read it like a pirate because his name is Captain Henley. Really interesting concept. The interesting world of how to make a passion a profession. If you were ever wondering how do people make money at that, here's your answer. Thanks, Captain Henley. So go leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Oh, you're not a Apple user? Well, shit. Go subscribe to our Nerdpreneur YouTube channel. Now back to the episode.
Yeah,
Did you ever do magic? Like, were you a
No.
magician ever?
I
No,
tried.
never.
I had a brief phase when I was a kid, but I didn't really like it. It was too granular for me. I wanted to do something. I mean, I enjoyed the nuance to an extent, but not enough to continue to do it. I
Mhm.
wanted to perform on a stage with other people and doing, characters. That
Mhm.
for me was much more fun than performing on a stage doing a magic trick. But for you with magic tricks, you did magic for a while. What was that like?
I kept buying different magic kits and like learning different, tricks. And then I would, often it was mainly like I'd perform for family members or,
Mm,
grandparents or friends or whatever it was. And again, I liked the ability to genuinely trick someone. And if someone was really like, wow, that really worked, or wow, that was impressive, all of a sudden it was, it was very satisfying. It was like, oh, cool.
yeah.
That was neat. Um, I got into acting too, and I think I fell more into the idea of playing characters. And I also never really, I think probably liking girls probably screwed it up because, like, hey, do you want to see a trick? Never got me any closer to meeting women either.
Oh
So
no.
and I noticed that there were like an abundance of men who did magic, and there was like very few women interested in that whole thing. So I
Wow.
think when I hit puberty, all of that started to shift for me away, and it became less interesting. And then, of course, acting, where you get to like play characters that actually are around girls, that was actually exciting to me. So yeah, let's do that.
There is no deception around the amount that women played in your life as a motivator. There is no you're like
I'm why would I'm not going to hide a thing. No, it was part of
it's
my.
just funny how much it comes up, man.
But I think there was also a part of me that was just also like, wow, I can do something where I'm not myself and impress other people. And I found that being a magician, even though you're actually sort of tricking people, if you are a magician, you're still kind of playing you at the end of the day. It's almost like a stand-up comedian or something. You do adopt this sort of magical persona maybe, or create
Mhm.
your own character. I never really went down that road. I found it much easier to be like, give me the character and I'll find a way to be that, as opposed to layering up my own personality to develop something that could really work as a show act.
I would imagine that a lot of it is that way. I think of Stephen Colbert. He's not your typical magician or performer, but Stephen Colbert is a persona that he's put on, and it's so good that I mean, there's a great talk he had. I think it was with Oprah, and a great talk about just the kind of personality that Stephen Colbert, that character, is. And as opposed to how different they are from who he is in real life, because he's a very witty, intelligent, and spontaneous performer that does such a good job, but he puts on this character that I think is a lot like a magician. You have to put on kind of a quirky but or bigger than life persona,
Hmm.
um, as opposed to acting, which is usually a full on different person.
And what's interesting about this too is it's like, we all made our choices about where we were going in terms of performing and acting, and Jonas too. Like, we all, and a lot of the people we interview are taking choices in their early days or
Yeah.
early life, that maybe are not typical. Like the idea of following your passion to go after acting and going to school for that. I think both of us decided to do that. But then, Jonas, for him, he was like, I'm going to go and intern at radio studios because I want to be involved in radio and broadcasting. And also, I'm going to continue pursuing magic and continue to, do this scare actor stuff on the side and be a performer. And none of those were sort of like the proper, way to do things, as your parents might say, like go to
Right.
school, be able to get something you can fall back on. Like, nobody has anything like that really to fall back on when they go after these sort of passion projects. And I thought that one of the lessons that I got out of this episode was the be cautionary about advice you hear and taking it. Like taking
Yes.
advice that you get with a grain of salt, because if you hear it from someone, they're often giving you the advice that they themselves did or worked for them that got them to the point where they are. And if they're not where you want to be, it's probably not always the best advice to take, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and if you want to be, say, working as a magician or doing something that's very performative, or working in radio, going and doing this thing like taking school or whatever it is that isn't related to what you actually want to do, or go taking a job like working at a golf course because it pays well and is consistent, versus like volunteering at a radio station, that then down the road that really paid off for him. And I think that there's value in like kind of taking advice with a grain of salt that you hear.
Yeah. I mean, talk about taking three different avenues. I mean, if we've got the scare actor, the magician, and the radio disc jockey, announcer, personality, voice, those are not things that you think are stable jobs. You don't think of those as things that, oh, I can fall back on one of these.
Yeah.
And I think that's really brave of him.
Mm.
And whether it's conscious in that way or not, we didn't really talk about it so much. But I do think that more often than not, people have these fallbacks. I mean, you had your sales that you did, and I had my sort of sales. It was more of I had more of food and beverage. That was my fallback. But I think that what he did and is doing is, I don't know if it's unique to just being in Europe or specifically Germany. If there's enough of a system in place to support people to where that's fine. But I know over here in America, at least, it would be really tricky for someone to pursue those kinds of things. They would be struggling to make ends meet. And I think that it does require us to take that into perspective when we think about people over here being able to take that advice of just pursue what you want. And it kind of goes back to the point that you were saying, having that fallback. I think having a fallback, I still believe a fallback is very good and important, but I don't think that means you can't pursue wholeheartedly what you want as long as you have planned it out accordingly. So I've just monologued for a bit just to make a point that it context is important.
Well, I think you have to pursue, especially if you're young. Like if you are, and young is still a relative term too, but the idea of
Yeah.
just being in school, right? If you have some aptitude towards something and you also love doing it, is there any real drawback in throwing yourself wholeheartedly into pursuing that at a young age? Is there really a risk? Because there are a lot of people that will probably tell you, yeah, it's risky to do that and not follow the program that everyone else lays out for you. When in actuality, the risk is very minimal if you dedicated 2, 3, 4, 5 years of your very young life towards
Yeah.
something like that. As long as you graduate high school. I think everyone should probably graduate high school before they make these
Sure.
major decisions. But I think that, the idea of, say, oh, I want to be a dancer. That's an example. Well,
Mhm.
if you want to be a dancer, and you're decent enough to say be on, doing dance and getting some level of recognition in your local area or on your local teams, then yeah, maybe you should pursue that immediately after school instead of going to college, because the likelihood of you actually succeeding after college goes so dramatically down, just like sports or anything else that's sort of
Yeah.
around that level. Same with, say, if you wanted to be an actor and you were getting roles as a kid. Well, if you're making that happen, then maybe, and you enjoy it, then continue down that path and forget the idea of college or the idea
Mhm.
of working for a couple of years and figuring out who you are. I think that's a good idea if you have not found your aptitude yet. But you
Yeah.
have to have, but if you start finding something you actually are good at and also really enjoy doing, and those two things start to align, but you haven't started making money at it yet, and you're young, just go friggin' after it anyway. And I see that with Jonas.
The age definitely is a big one. I mean, the older you get, there's probably this like inverse relationship graph about
Mhm.
how the older you get, the more risky it becomes. Because when you're younger, your financial net, whether it's your parents or whatever, is much more supportive. And then when you get older, it's much more on you to manage your finances and to make sure that you can pay your bills. And I think that, it requires that. It's another thing about context for each person. Um, I just think of, what's going on right now in the world with prices going up all over the place, and being here in America, it is very much something that we feel, and people are going to be looking for alternative forms of income. I mean, that's something that we talk about, and that's something that we are interested in.
Yeah.
But it's hard if you don't plan it. You are risking a lot, so it's really important to plan some sort of safety net in order to be able to be a zombie magician or whatever your passion is.
Well, yeah, and I do think that there's there's a couple things here. I think you're right that maybe there is a bit of an inverse relationship graph that as you get older it might become, say, more risky in some way. But I also think that our aversion to risk actually minimizes as we get older. Because people become more averse to risk and become more stuck in their ways and become more. And so the harder it is for people who are older to actually change or to actually step out of what they consider their comfort zone, because they feel more and more confidently that this is who they are and this is the right path or whatever it is. And I want to shake that up a little bit, because as much as we might, like, how easy is it to coach anyone who's, say, 15 or 20 years old to, like, go pursue your passion and go do that, right? Of course you can, because at 20 or 25 even, you have fucking everything else ahead of you. You really have very little risk. You'd screw up for 5 years and you'd still bounce and be fine at 30, you know what I'm saying? Whereas when you're, say, 39 or even 50, right? Or heaven forbid, you
especially
get into
if you have
retirement
kids.
age, right? Yeah. Well, all of a sudden, you might have kids, you might have a house, you might have other things. Unlikely a house if you're a millennial. But you know what? If you have any of those things that give you that sense of security, I guess, as to where you are, I think it's important still to consider risk and have because if you're not happy, if you're not pursuing something that does make you happy, or if you're not building towards something in the future that gives you meaning, then you're really, really screwed, right? Because when you start looking at things and saying, man, I'm going to pursue all this, but you can't see a brighter future, well, then you're putting all this time and energy into something that actually creates no meaning, and there's no meaning in the end of it. So that's how people get really depressed and down and all that other stuff. So there is a risk of not doing those things and not pursuing what you really should or really want to do. So staying where you are and never changing is also it's a heavy risk if we don't, if you're doing that calculus for yourself.
Yeah, I agree that risk is definitely something that people should take into account when they start looking into their passions that they want to pursue. If they want to steer away from the 9 to 5, and it's funny, 9 to 5 is so inaccurate, but it's the common thing we call it. It's an 8 to 5. When you do the 8 to 5 and you are trying to pursue something that'll bring you more meaning, more joy, more purpose, you really got to factor in that risk. And that's hard. But I think that I kind of want to tie it back real quick to what something Jonas was saying around what his definition of nerdy. I think it very much ties in. And I think it was one of the more unique definitions of what someone who's a nerd was, which is someone that pursues something despite what everyone else says. And I remember being kind of floored a bit when he gave us that and not really sure how to respond or what to think. But I feel like if people still pursue it, knowing that there is risk and aware of the measures that they need to take to be safe, whether it's 6 months worth of expenses and rent in their bank, that kind of safety net in order to pursue someone's passion, despite what other people are saying, that's awesome. And Jonas really tapped into that with, what you said earlier about the advice that he was given, that would be considered bad advice about how to find happiness and success. Do what you want, but take the context, the risk, and the financial requirements into account when you do.
I don't necessarily think we should be pursuing necessarily what makes us happy either.
That's controversial. Go for it, though.
I think we should be pursuing what gives us a sense of meaning. And there's it's an important distinction for me, I think, because there are a lot of people that will say, I'm pursuing this thing to be happy, right? And like, let's take Jonas as an example, right? I think he gets meaning out of all the things that he's doing, whether it be, scaring people or doing magic. I think that actually creates some level of meaning in his life for him. And I also think that there's a pursuit that he's getting there that, he gets better at each of those things. and he studies them, and he he's wrapped up in practicing and skills, and he sees progress in it, and all of those things. And I think that pursuing the meaningful relationship that magic and scaring people and being the zombie magician, that way he has a chance to express himself, that pursuit of meaning actually leads to a happier and more satisfied life. But I think there's a lot of people that get confused in the equation, saying I'm going to pursue this thing to be happy. And the problem is that when you start pursuing something that maybe you are not that good at, or maybe you are struggling to find results in, and always putting outside, like, oh, I'll be happy when I do my first magic show, or when I'm making money as a magician, or when I have enough money to buy a house with my magician money, right? Or whatever it is, and plug in any number of passions into magician instead of magician. You're really creating a calculus that's going to make it hard to be happy, because you're always pursuing, oh, I'll get this, I'll be happy when. Yeah. And it's actually not about being happy. It should be about pursuing the meaning behind what you're doing. And actually that will lead to happiness, because you're not measuring your happiness based on, say, how much money you're getting or how much recognition you're getting, but more on your personal satisfaction of doing the thing you really enjoy doing and pursuing.
Yeah, I think you said that super well, man. I mean, it's not the objectives. When you pursue the objectives, you're setting yourself up for unhappiness. And if you are pursuing the meaning, then you will find the joy from that purpose. I think that's super true. I read a book recently that really tapped into that, Hero on a Mission, and he cites Viktor Frankl's The Meaning of Life. Big time.
Man's Search for Meaning. Close.
Oh, that's what it is? Man's Search for Meaning? Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks.
It's a super, super great book. I read it a long time ago, just when I was fresh out of college. But like the first half of the book is about his experience in the Nazi concentration camps, and what it meant, like what was really going on there, but also what it meant to him being there, and some of the things he learned about who survived and who didn't. Through those extreme horrible circumstances. And then the second part of the book is like his philosophical treatise on how man creates meaning for themselves within their life, and whatever it is that we attach meaning to is actually matters a lot more than, say, what objective meaning that might be outside of it. It's actually all about the meaning we place upon things, which psychologically at that moment was a really revolutionary concept that I think a lot of people have heard of, but still have trouble with.
I could have used that fresh out of college. That would have been a great book at that time in my life. I was so attached to very specific things that I created around. Yeah. But anyway,
we'll have to do a psychotherapy episode sometime into those lost Frank years.
Or I was actually going to say something that would be cool is kind of like a book club, doing, reading a book, you and I reading a book and doing a chapter, kind of a reflection each chapter. But that's another thought.
Let us know if anyone actually wants to hear us read books.
Yeah. And speaking of, thanks to everybody listening and to everyone's support for our podcast. This is Talking Nerdy, a simple recap and look at the episode we just listened back to, and this one was for Jonas the Zombie Magician. Take care, everyone.
Thanks again for listening. Remember to leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and follow @Nerdpreneur Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube. And remember what William James said: do 2 things today that you hate, just for practice. Thanks again for listening, and as always, keep it nerdy.